You're listening to the Vint Wine Podcast, where you'll hear interviews and stories from around the wine world. From writers and critics to winemakers and sommeliers, we'll explore the people and businesses who are instrumental in shaping wine culture. Enjoy the show.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Vint Wine Podcast. I'm your host, Billy Galanko, and today we have our very first producer of Brunello di Montalcino on the podcast. We have Alessandro Bindocci from Il Poggione, and we have a great conversation. We cover where it is geographically, just for everyone who may not be familiar. We talk about the different wines that they make, and they were nice enough to send me a selection of the wines as well. So I will give you a little bit more background on Alessandro and the winery and the wines in a second. But first, I have a couple updates for the podcast. As you all may have remembered, I was going to be acquiring full ownership of the podcast. Those gears are finally in motion. I am hoping to acquire the full rights in the coming weeks. And when that happens, I will have a new name that I will unveil. And there will be a number of exciting things that will come along with the new name. I will be launching a standalone website. We will also be reinvigorating YouTube. So we will be posting episodes from the podcast. I'm still debating on whether it will be full episodes or it might just be 5 questions. We will see, but there will also be a ton of shorts. And then I'm looking forward to also expanding into other types of content, working on history or regional spotlights or just things that I really want to cover that I can't fit in our typical podcast format. So I am really excited for those updates to come down the line. Everybody stay tuned. Finger crossed that everything goes smoothly in the acquisition and transition process. But for today, we have our great guest, Alessandro Bindocci of Il Poggione. Something that's really interesting about Alessandro is that he is not the first Bindocci to work at Il Poggione. He actually has multiple generations. His father, his grandfather, they all worked at the winery as well. Il Poggione actually has a bunch of different aspects of the winery that are taken care of by multiple generations of the same family. So that was really cool to hear about from Alessandro. They really are just one big family there, which is really interesting and really great. I'm sure that goes a long way in keeping the quality of the wine as high and consistent as it is. And in the podcast, like I mentioned, he gives us some great background on Brunello di Montalcino as a DOCG. And it was really just fascinating to have him walk us through the whole range of wines that they produce there. And I, as I mentioned, was lucky enough to taste a range of their wines. So I got to taste, first, they have a rosé that is made 100% of Sangiovese. And I've always thought that Sangiovese is a perfect grape for a rosé. It's not too high in color, but it's also just that great acid. It always has a little bit of that, my wife calls it dustiness, but I think of it as like this minerality, the most savory nature to Sangiovese that comes along with the bright red fruit. And it was everything that I was expecting from a beautiful Sangiovese rosé that had 24 hours on the skin. The fermentation was kept at a cool temperature. I think the fermentation was slow at like 25 days at 12 degrees Celsius or something. Very cool and interesting fermentation and great rosé there. And then we worked our way up through their Toscana. They make it an IGT Super Tuscan type blend with Merlot along with Sangiovese and Cabernet Sauvignon. It comes from fruit that's grown in vineyards that are between about 500 and 1,500 feet above sea level. So a little bit of elevation. They're cooled by the ocean breezes that can make their way all the way from the Tyrrhenian Sea right there. And they also, this is the first wine we'll mention this with, undergo extended maceration with the skins via Submerged-Cap. So this is one of Il Poggione's calling cards, is they use Submerged-Cap for tannin extraction and just to integrate the skins with the juice to make their red wines. You may also remember this from our Henschke episode. Stephen and Prue also talked about the merits and the values of using Submerged-Cap, and it's also very common up in Piemonte as well, which is what inspired Il Poggione to do it. And I didn't realize, he mentions it further in the podcast, that a lot of Brunello producers have an affinity for the wines of Barolo and Barbaresco, and they kind of have a bond with a lot of producers up there, which is really interesting to me. So moving on from their Super Tuscan, which is a great red wine, very, very approachable and yet still complex and interesting. They have their full range of wines from Montalcino. So the first one is the DOC Rosso di Montalcino. Then they have the Brunello di Montalcino. And then they have their Brunello di Montalcino Reserva. And I was able to get the 2022 of the Rosso, the 2020 of the Brunello, and the 2019 of the Reserva. Something cool about the Reserva is it's from a single vineyard, single parcel of the oldest vines on the property. And that was very evident in the wine itself. While all of the wines were extremely well made and had a lot of depth, complexity, and concentration, you could definitely tell that the Reserva coming from the Vigna Paganelli had a little bit more nuance coming from 100% using those old vines. But across all of these vineyards, the Sangiovese are almost all selections from this oldest vineyard section. So it is the same genetic material, and it's just at varying levels of age of the vines, where they're located. They're all farmed in an organic manner, and then they're aged in various types of vessels. The Rosso sees a little bit of time in both large barrel and smaller barriques. The Brunello and the Reserva are exclusively aged in large French oak barrels. You can tell the texture across the board from the Submerged-Cap really provides a refined, integrated tannin. And again, it's just really classic Brunello and Sangiovese character coming through across each, and it steadily progresses from the Rosso to the Brunello to the Reserva. I will say that he mentioned it on the call as well, that you probably wouldn't want to drink this Reserva so young. You probably also need to give the Brunello a number of years to really start developing a little bit more too. But again, with the Submerged-Cap, the texture of the tannins are so great even now, but it's going to the tannins will continue to polymerize and develop even further and become softer as the wine ages, along with the development of the complex character notes. But the tannins, just the way that the wine was made, already make the wine very accessible and not nearly as astringent as you might find in some other techniques where the tannins are more traditionally extracted and really take years and years to become really softer on the wine. They're all perfect food wines because they're Italian, and that's actually what they were made to be, is paired with food, but it's fantastic on their own. I thoroughly enjoyed them. So thank you so much to Il Poggione for sending them. And thank you for Alessandro for walking me through all the wines. I really enjoyed our conversation today. I hope everybody learns a lot about Montalcino, and Brunello di Montalcino is our first episode with a producer from this area. And I thought it was a perfect primer on what the region is all about and some of the quality wines that come from them. So without further ado, here is Alessandro Bindocci, winemaker of Il Poggione. Hi, Alessandro. Thanks so much for joining today.
Thanks for having me. It was great to be here.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to having a Brunello di Montalcino producer on the podcast for a long time, and I'm really excited to start with Il Poggione. Could you maybe first share a little bit about your background and who you are, and then we'll dive into the wines and the property?
Sure. Yeah, my name is Alessandro Bindocci, as probably everyone knows, and I've been involved with Il Poggione for quite some time now. Next year will be my 20th year with the winery. However, my family has been involved with Il Poggione for a very long time, approximately, I would say, close to 100 years. My sister Francesca and I are the fourth generation of our family to work for the Franceschi family owners of Il Poggione, and we run the winery, make the wines, and many different things within Il Poggione on their behalf. So definitely a long history that connects us with the winery.
Yeah, certainly. I wanted to ask a little bit about how you got into wine, but first, how do you build this like multi-generational family relationship? Is it something that did your great-great-grandfather, were they friends with the Franceschi family and then they just stayed on, or how does that relationship develop over such a long period of time?
It's a little bit peculiar of Il Poggione. We often have multiple generation of owners. As you mentioned, that doesn't happen as often as with winemakers. But yeah, basically when the Franceschis arrived in Montalcino, and they were originally from the Florence area, and they were looking to buy more land for their pastures, for the cattle, because that was their initial business. They arrived and they hired members of my family, so my ancestors. At the time, talking about the late 1800s, early 1900s, there wasn't like a real winemaker figure. So it was more of a farmer figure or doing different things within the farm. But yeah, they got to know them. It's not 100% clear, of course, talking about 4 generations ago. So it's a little bit complicated to track back the exact details. But yeah, they were living in the area. My family has been living in Montalcino for the last 500 years or so. So very, very local. And of course, my great-grandfather would know really well the land here, the soils around Montalcino, and in particular, Sant'Angelo in Colle, where Il Poggione is. And so they started, I guess they liked the way they work because they kept hiring members of our family to work for them.
Yeah, fantastic. So when you were growing up, I assume you were around the winery a fair bit. Did you always know you were going to want to work there too, or did that happen over time?
Absolutely. I've always wanted to be a winemaker, always wanted to work for a winery. Been, of course, trying to do the harvest when I was like a little kid. And of course, being surrounded by giants of the industry. They were friends with my father. I've always been surrounded by the wine and the production. And of course, spending a lot of time in the winery. I've always wanted to do that. Then, of course, I decided to do my studies first in farming during high school, and then viticultural enology in university. So having something that was like connecting the practical aspect that I learned within my life together with the theoretical aspect that you study in school. Yeah, something that I always wanted to do. And of course, I was lucky that the proprietors wanted to hire me very quickly after my degree to work for the winery.
Yeah, and we'll get into it a little bit more in a minute, the practices of the winery, but were you able to use some things that you learned in university and kind of help transform the way some of the things were done at the winery? Maybe a couple things needed modernizing or updating, or did you keep things like mostly the same?
I very much like the style already. Poggione has always been recognized for its very, very, well, not very, very, but quite traditional style, but always open to modern aspect and new things. I was still a student when we built a new winery in 2004, and we discussed with my father and Leopoldo Franceschi different aspects of the production that we wanted to implement. I'm sure we'll go more into that when we talk about the wine, like the Submerged-Cap fermentation, for example. That's something that we started to implement with the newer winery. I think also, whilst we've always been sustainable, a great aspect that we introduced coincidentally when I started to work for Il Poggione was more of the organic and highly sustainable aspect of the farming. So yes, a strong view towards the sustainability for sure. But yeah, everything else I already like very much. Like it's a vision that I've always been aligned with, that I always liked a lot. So we didn't change much. The use of big barrels, the indigenous yeast, all these things that I've always wanted to do.
Awesome. Well, let's take a little step back and we'll dive. First, could you explain a little bit about Brunello di Montalcino, where Montalcino is, and what makes the Brunello clone and its various iterations so unique? And then we'll dive from there into Il Poggione itself and the different wines you make.
Absolutely. So Montalcino, we are in Tuscany, of course, southern Tuscany. It's a classic medieval hilltop town. And I'm sure most of your viewers have been here and they've been hearing a lot about Montalcino. But yes, it's the typical medieval hilltop town surrounded by walls. And Sant'Angelo in Colle is where Il Poggione is, so a little bit southern of the town of Montalcino. Montalcino, of course, is known for its wines, Brunello di Montalcino, Rosso di Montalcino mainly, which are the most known wines produced here. And it's definitely the only appellation in Tuscany that requires the production only with 100% of Sangiovese. No other varieties are allowed other than Sangiovese. So it's very unique from that point of view. Sangiovese, nowadays, many clones, any clone of Sangiovese really can be planted here. A lot of wineries rely on conservatories or different sources of Sangiovese. Nowadays, we study a lot the soil and the climate, so we want to have the best clones for our pedoclimatical condition. But yes, you can choose any type of Sangiovese for your vines. In particular, at Il Poggione, we use our own clones of Sangiovese that come from the oldest vineyard that we have within the property. It's like a 61-year-old vineyard. And we reproduce those vines with an in-house conservatory. But in general, any Sangiovese can be planted. Of course, the area is not huge. I know it's the municipality of Montalcino is pretty much like a square if you look in a map, like 25 kilometers by 25 kilometers. The town of Montalcino itself, it's pretty much in the middle. And then you have different towns all around it where different producers can plant Sangiovese. Of course, which is very important, there's a cap. So you cannot freely plant Sangiovese for your Brunello. The production is controlled. The yield is controlled by the regulations. The same with the Rosso di Montalcino. So that is one of the secrets of Brunello, the controlled production. I think we are talking about roughly 9 million barrels a year overall for all the producers, and is about 260 producers in Montalcino. So not a huge area, and most of those wineries are quite small, one or two hectares. And the other beautiful thing, one of the other strengths of Montalcino is the diversity of the territory. Some other parts of the world, one region of the world, if you look from above, all you see is vineyards, whereas the majority of Montalcino is actually a forest. So its biodiversity is one of its strengths. It's always been a very, very diversified territory.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I was able to visit a few years ago, and that was the first thing that struck me. I hadn't realized how much forest there was around. So that was really interesting. Great. I had one question that I wanted to double back on so if any Sangiovese can be planted. I've always read over the years that the Brunello clone or the specific iteration of Sangiovese is particular to being used in Brunello di Montalcino itself. Are you saying that is used as well, like Brunello Grosso or whatever, or Sangiovese Grosso? That's what it's called. Is that the case, or can you really just take a clone of Sangiovese that's maybe grown up further north in Chianti and bring it and plant it and use it in Brunello as well?
Absolutely. Sangiovese Grosso was probably in the late 1800s, late 1900s, that was the most planted variety in the area. But yes, the regulation that we follow to make Brunello talks about Sangiovese. So in theory, if you wanted to, you could get a Sangiovese from Romagna even, or from other parts of Italy. Of course, I don't think it happens. I don't know, out of 260 producers, how many clones you can find, but yes, it could be from everywhere. I think it's another strength of Brunello is that the regulation, whilst being a regulation so strict enough to control the quality, gives the producers some kind of flexibility, some kind of freedom, so that you can have a much more diverse and broad range of quality and type of wines within the appellation and suit and taste.
Cool. That makes a lot of sense. I know we're going to talk about what makes each of your different classified wines unique, but could you give a high level for our listeners who may not be as familiar on the difference between Montalcino Rosso, just regular Brunello di Montalcino, and then maybe the Reserva level as well, even though I know that can vary a little bit?
Sure. Generally speaking, so Brunello, of course, is a fairly old appellation, started in the late 1800s, didn't get its DOC status until the 1960s, DOCG status until the 1980s. And so the rules are quite simple. So the one that applies to all three appellations is that the grapes is only Sangiovese can only be produced within the boundaries of the municipality of Montalcino. What differentiates in general is the aging and the release time. So Rosso di Montalcino doesn't have any aging requirement, and it can be released 12 months from the harvest. So on September, 1 year after the harvest. Brunello di Montalcino has a minimum aging requirement of 2 years in oak, a minimum bottle aging requirement of 4 months in the bottle, and it can be released 5 years from the harvest. So January 1st, 5 years after the harvest. Brunello di Montalcino Riserva, instead, still has the same oak aging requirement as the Brunello, so 2 years in oak, a little bit longer in the bottle, which is 6 months, and the release is 6 years after the harvest, so January 1st, the 6th year after the harvest.
Cool.
That's it now for the whole appellation.
Right. All right, cool. With that foundation set, let's dive into Il Poggione itself. I think you touched on it a little bit more about your efforts to transform into organic. So let's talk about the estate, maybe touching on like the elevation and the kind of the setup and soils in your vineyards and maybe how you guys farm, and then we'll dive into the wines.
Of course, the property is the farm is quite large. Even though vineyard is only a small percentage of it, the whole property is about 1,500 acres of land. Out of these 1,500 acres, 300 acres are planted with vineyards, and the rest is different crops. So we have, of course, forest. We have different grains like different cereals, 12,000 olive trees that we use for our olive oil. So very, very much diversified. And of course, within this size, we have quite a different elevation. We go from 150 meters up to 450 meters. I think it's pretty much between 500 and 1,500 feet above sea level. We are on the southern slope of Montalcino. So it's the area around the town of Sant'Angelo in Colle, basically that looks towards the Maremma. So we look south, and we have two very important things that define us. One is the local mountain, Mount Amiata, which is quite close to where we are. It's about 1,800 meters high, and it's a very, very important role of protecting the area from all the elements. Montalcino, touching wood or iron, we say in Italy, is not very common that we get hail here. Very, very uncommon, unlike other parts of Italy. And so that's a big benefit given by the protection of the Mount Amiata. The other advantage, the other things that's peculiar to us is the proximity to the sea, which most people don't realize that the Montalcino has. If you drive to the coast, it's about, 50 kilometers, something like that. But if you draw a straight line on a map, is roughly 30 kilometers. So very, very close. And we see that with the wind that is there all the time, especially here in Sant'Angelo is where we have a big wind all the time. It also helps us from the sustainable farming because our vines hardly get any disease. Plus, it helps from the temperature aspect. So there's always a big diurnal temperature range, especially in the summer months, in July and August. In August especially, we go to really high temperature, even 35 Celsius during the day, going down to even 15 at night. And that's actually perfect because that's when when the grapes develop all the beautiful aromas. And a cooler night really helps achieving that.
And it helps you guys maintain some freshness along with the ripeness as well, right?
Absolutely. Nowadays, summer is always warm and dry. So having cooler nights helps delaying a little bit the ripening and having that beautiful degree of freshness that helps counterbalancing wines that are a little bit richer and a little bit bigger.
Nice. And you were saying you completely converted over to organics as of this year. Is that right?
So yes, 25 is the first year, the first vintage that will be certified organic. Il Poggione has been working pretty much organically for the last 20 years. And we decided might as well get certified. It's a lot easier to communicate if you can put it on the label. And so we've done that. And yes, 25 would be the first vintage. But sustainability has always been a really strength of ours in many, many aspects. Not only in the use of products to treat the vines, but also in producing the power with solar panels. And the whole winery the roof is covered with solar panels, so we can be pretty much self-sufficient in terms of electricity production. We reuse all the byproducts from the winemaking and the olive oil making as a natural fertilizer. So those are organic and very strong fertilizers, so really good for the soil. Plus, I think it's also very important, the sustainable human aspect of the farming. We have a big family of 60 people working with us all around. A lot of them have been with us for 10, 20 years or more, or different generations of the same family. So people that know really well the vines, the vineyards, and of course, people that work with us all around. You employ them and you give them like the guarantee that they can get their paycheck every month. So the aspect that is really, really important for us. And also we are obviously is a big family, and the family feeding, the family aspect of the farming is really, really important to us.
Yeah, I was about to mention that because I was going to say you guys probably have like a family-like relationship with the Franceschis, but now if everybody's been there for generations, it's almost like they're your extended cousins or uncles or something.
Absolutely. Just last week, 10 days ago, we had the end of the harvest celebration, and it's always so much fun because we do it in the cellar, and we sit down, all the workers and their families. So you talk about close to 200 people having lunch together, and it's really, really amazing feeling. That is also when we award those who have been with us for 20 years with a medal. So it's a really, really great feeling, and it's like really sense of community that you have, because that's the best place to, like, around the table eating together. That's always the best occasion to celebrate and to stay together.
Yeah. Wow, that sounds really cool. All right, cool. Well, let's move into the cellar. Can you share a little bit about, I know you talked about the traditional style of winemaking, but what is the kind of style or house style of Poggione, or where can people expect that maybe sets your wines a little different from maybe some of the other 250 plus producers?
Something really unique about Il Poggione, as I was mentioning, is started to happen when we built a new winery in 2004. So it's almost it's 21 years ago, and 2004 was the first harvest that we made in a new winery. We decided we wanted to do something to improve the quality, make of course better wines. So the first thing that we focused on was the vinification. We of course had to buy a lot of stainless steel tanks, and so we found a local supplier in Italy that allowed us to have them basically custom-made, tailor-made for our needs. They're all computer control, which nowadays it's the rule for new wineries, but 20 years ago was not so common. And so we wanted to optimize the work in the cellar, so that we could send more people in the vineyards, because that's where you really need the hands of the people and the eyes of the people. So not only the computer control, but also something that we added was the inside the tank. So we started to do a technique that is very, very common in Piedmont, but not so common in Tuscany, which is the Submerged-Cap fermentation. Think of a French press for coffee. We install those mesh filters inside the tanks that always keep the skins in contact with the wine for the whole length of the fermentation. So as we fill up the tank from the bottom, the skins get blocked from this mesh filter, and this filter can be moved up and down, hence increasing the contact surface between wine and skins, and so increasing tannin extraction, color extraction, and so we saw amazing results in terms of extraction of color, tannins, etc. But also that can be a small risk when you have hot summers, when the sugar ripening is right and the tannic ripening is not quite right. It's a bit too early to harvest. So we also thought about that. And the bottom of the tank is not flat, completely flat. So we made sure that the bottom of the tank was a little sloped towards the front. So by doing that, we can remove some of the seeds in the early stages of the fermentation, so we can reduce the green tannins into the wine.
Yeah, I wanted to ask on that. Did you also see a textural difference in the wine with the submerged cap? We had Prue and Stephen Henschke on from Australia, and they're making some of the top wines down in Australia, and they also use the submerged cap. And they were mentioning that the structure and the just texture of the wine itself became a little softer, a little bit more integrated when they started using it. Curious what you guys found.
We found a very good extraction of tannins. That was the main thing. So definitely in terms of texture, but also we need those tannins, because our wines, of course, age for 3-4 years in oak. So you need a lot of great tannins to integrate with the oak tannins. So there was definitely a textural difference, mainly in terms of tannin extraction.
Nice. All right. I guess I was asking, did you find the tannins to be maybe softer not like softer, but basically like needing less time in bottle or barrel to integrate and become maybe more like silky? Or did you see them you're getting more of them and it was always the same high quality that you guys had always gotten?
It was pretty much more tannins like this,
yeah,
but a different kind. The main difference was in the extraction of color. We saw wines that are like more depth in colors. I say more polyphenols were extracted from the skin, so deeper wines in terms of color extraction.
Yeah, so more anthocyanins and more things for them to bond to and retain in suspension. Cool.
Exactly.
Very nice. Well, cool. Then, so do you use submerged cap for all of your red wines, or only the Brunello and the Reserva?
All the red wines are fermented with submerged cap fermentation. We thought there would be no point in differentiating. We want to have those beautiful deep red colors of the wines, so definitely we use them for all the reds. Because actually all of our reds age for quite some time in oak, whether it's only 1 year for the Rosso di Montalcino or our blend. or 3 and 4 years for the Brunello or Brunello Riserva. So you need that extraction for the wine to have this beautiful long oak aging.
Yeah, perfect. Well, on that note, could you maybe just walk us through your lineup here? I have your full lineup behind me, and we'll have tasted it at the beginning of this episode. But maybe from lightest, we'll start with the rosé and work our way up to the Reserva.
Yeah, of course. And of course, I didn't mention another important aspect, and I'll go in a minute onto the lineup. We didn't mention the oak that we use.
Yeah.
The oak that we use is all French oak. So when we moved to the new winery, we wanted to have the best quality oak for our wines. In the old time, has a long history of Eastern European oak, which we also used, Slavonian oak in particular. And what we had in the older winery was more of a really huge barrels, 10,000 liters in size, which were good for when we aged the wine for 4 years, 5 years at least in oak. When we moved to the new winery, we still work with the big barrels, which as here we call botti, and that are still huge, but not as big as the one we used to have. So now we use 3,000 and 5,000 liter of French oak barrels that we choose. We choose the oak ourselves in France. That is also very unique to Il Poggione. In collaboration with with the cooper that we work with, we go to France, we select the oak for our barrels, and after a very long seasoning, so 6 years of seasoning, the barrels are built, and it's all natural wood, so untoasted, just to preserve the flavors of the wine and not overpowering them with oak. Can be beautiful in other varieties, but Sangiovese being so elegant and delicate, if you are not careful, you can easily overpower the wine with oak notes. And so our choice was to use big untoasted oak barrels.
Nice. That makes sense. And then do you also supplement that with the use of smaller oak? Are they ever racked out of the big barrels into smaller ones, or is it just all 3,000-5,000?
So Brunello Riserva is only 3,000 and 5,000 liter. Other wines, a small percentage of the Rosso di Montalcino also ages in barrique. And our Rosso di Toscana, which is our super Tuscan blend, Sangiovese, Merlot, and Cabernet Sauvignon, the Merlot and Cabernet Sauvignon aspect, part of it, age in barrique. We're not completely against the use of barriques. We understand that it can be useful in certain instances, especially for wines that age for a little less time. Of course, they can be really useful as the contact surface is a little bit higher. And so, wines that age for less time, we integrate the oak aging with the big barrels aging with a little bit of barrique aging, but still focusing on the big barrels.
Cool. And we're doing this backwards now, but you mentioned you use indigenous yeast. Are you fermenting in steel predominantly as well and then transferring to the wood?
Yes, we only ferment in stainless steel. We decided to use stainless steel because by using indigenous yeast for the alcoholic fermentation and indigenous bacteria for the malolactic, it's important to have an environment which is clean, so to avoid any type of other microorganism. Contamination is always around the corner in a winery, so you have to be really, really careful. Stainless steel, of course, you can keep it very clean, and also you can control the temperature much better. And so this way we can do a temperature control fermentation with only the grapes and own bacteria. No fermentation in oak at all.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. And then the mallow goes through in steel as well.
Absolutely. We add together with free flow wine after the alcoholic fermentation is finished. We add some wine coming from the early pressing of the grapes. So that is very rich in malolactic bacteria, and we don't need to add the bacteria. So the fermentation goes smoothly to an end. I suppose, especially for the alcoholic fermentation, we have good strains of yeast that bring fermentation easily to an end.
Yeah, cool. That makes a lot of sense. All right, I think I want to. When we talk about your lineup here, I also want to talk about the vintages that you've experienced in recent years as well. So maybe we'll start. We'll start with the rosé and work our way back. So that's the one I have is 2024. And then can you maybe tell us a little bit about what the current growing season, like the 2025 vintage was like, and then we'll work our way back vintage by vintage.
Of course, the 2025, we just finished, the wines are finishing through malolactic fermentation at the moment. And if you speak to many producers in Tuscany, you will hear many great things about 25. 25 has been a really, really good vintage for all of us. It's been a vintage where we had a colder winter, more or less, because nowadays everything is relative, especially we don't get snow, for example, anymore during the winter. But it's good enough if we get like a few weeks of colder weather. The spring had a good amount of rain, and so that created a beautiful reserve of water. And that's nowadays in the farming, that's the priority. We wanna the best way to fight those dry summers besides the irrigation, when if one can use it and when it's possible, is of course to have the natural reserves of water into the soil. And that of course normally is in what one would hope would be in the winter with snow, because that's always the best source of water. But if we don't have that, then the rains in the springtime, and the soil with a lot of working of the soil can retain that and use it as a good supply of water for the vines. The summer was warm, definitely. There was some shortage of rain at first, but then we had around June also a little bit of rain, which then stopped. And then again in August, after a fairly warm summer, there were like a couple of days of rain, again, to cool down the air and to slow down a little bit the ripening of the grapes. But yeah, excellent quality, 25. So we are really seeing already juices with beautiful aromas, beautiful flavors. So it should be, now we can see that we're very, very positive about 25 and what it's going to be.
Fantastic. How does this year compare to, say, like 2019 or some other quality years that have stood out recently?
Yeah, 2019 is a great vintage for Montalcino. That was, compared to 25, just a little bit warmer. So you will find wines that have definitely more structure, sometimes a little less acidity. I was actually very happy with 2019 because we were able to obtain really high level of acidity, which is great. Sangiovese, of course, is known for its natural acidity, but nowadays you can find wines with those really warm summer months that are relatively lower in that. We have the fortune of having really old vines, and they can find water and nutrients even in dry years. Plus, in some vintages, not in 19 because we didn't need to, but in some vintages we can also water the vines. So we installed dripping irrigation in most of our vineyards since the time that it was authorized for the appellation. But yeah, 19, whilst we didn't water, the summer was a little bit warmer, so the wines come with a really beautiful structure. So you will find wines that are very, very austere, old school style of Brunello because of this structure.
Perfect. And then I have the 2019 Reserva here. Can you talk a little bit about the time and the winemaking for this particular wine?
Of course. So the Reserva, we don't make it every year. So it's a very unique wine to us. We chose to make our Brunello Reserva only in the best vintages. And as for all the wines that we make, the choice of grapes comes from the vineyards, different vineyards. So different wines, different vineyards. Whereas Rosso di Montalcino, Brunello, and all the other wines come from a blend of different vines, Reserva is our only single vineyard. So you will see at the bottom.
That's what the Vigna Paganelli stands for?
Yeah. So Vigna Paganelli is the oldest vineyard that we have on the estate. It was planted in 1964. It must be, it's hard to say that it's the oldest one in Montalcino because there's always maybe one or two vines that are older than that, and it's hard to track that, but definitely one of the oldest ones in the appellation. And that's where it's very important to us because that's where in the 70s they did a master selection to identify all the different clones that were there and pick the ones that we still use nowadays. And so yes, this is the oldest vineyard. It's not a small vineyard because it's about 30 acres in size, but you would think that, of course, 60-plus-year-old vines don't make a lot of grapes. So it's a fairly limited production. We're only able to make up to 40,000 bottles of this wine. And the other difference in besides the age of the vines is the aging of the wine. So we do a very long aging of 4 years. And again, only in big barrels. So much longer than the legal requirement for Reserva. But we really want to give this wine the importance that it deserves and the ageability that it must have. It's unthinkable to us to have a Brunello Reserva that is drinkable now when it's released. It's always a discovery. You open the Reserva when you feel like is the right time, and maybe it will be a little bit too young, or maybe it's the right time. And if it's too young, you just see it developing in your glass.
Fantastic. Then moving on, I have the 2020 Brunello here. Can you share a little bit about the 2020 growing season as well?
Of course. So 2020, again, was a little bit on the warmer side. You will find that the spring was also fairly ready. It's always been the case in the most recent decades. So like always a good amount of water, but especially during July, the summer and the beginning of August, the summer was a little bit warmer than the average. 2020, you will find it when you taste it that the wine is softer. It's actually quite enjoyable. On the other hand, doesn't mean ready or short-lived. It is that we manage also in 2020 to have a beautiful structure, beautiful freshness into the wine. So the acidity level is quite high, and that the acidity is the backbone of the wine. And so it really gives the wine like a very beautiful humidity. It is a wine that we aged for 3 years in oak anyway, so to give this structure. And had we seen that the wine was too soft, we would have chosen to age it for a little bit less. But we saw that with this level of acidity and tannins, despite the warmer summer, the wine needed the right amount of aging. So that's why we chose to do 3 years in big French oak barrels.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. And then, so I have also the 2023 and 2022. I have the 2023 Toscana and the 2022 Rosso di Montalcino. I would love to talk about them next to each other because they're two. Maybe some drinkers may see Rosso on both of them and think they're similar, but with the grapes being so different, I assume the profile of each wine is completely unique.
They are completely different. Yes, the Rosso di Toscana is something that we decided to do that we've been making for many years, although it was different than it is nowadays. So when we started making it more than 20 years ago, maybe 30 years ago even, was unoaked Sangiovese. So very, very interesting wine for today's drinkers. For those who know Sangiovese, because you have beautiful expression of fresh fruit, high acidity. But we found it sometimes difficult to explain, especially in markets outside of Tuscany, because of course in Tuscany we know Sangiovese well. And it became, our idea was to have a wine that would be the first step for new Sangiovese or Italian wine drinkers or Tuscan wine drinkers to appreciate Sangiovese. A lot of people that are approaching old world wines, they can get a little bit intimidated by the peculiarity of the Sangiovese, especially the acidity. In Tuscany, we have our wines with food normally, that solves the problem. But if you have the wine by itself, a lot of people can find the acidity difficult. So the idea was to blend it with something else. At the same time, we thought that wines should talk of the place that they come from. And if it was only international varieties, it would have been impossible to identify this as a Tuscan wine. So we wanted Sangiovese to be predominant. So in this case, it's roughly 50% Sangiovese and the rest is Merlot and Cabernet. So you have the softness and the approachability of the international varieties, but at the same time, the predominance of Sangiovese, so a lot of red fruit and a beautiful freshness. So it was, I think, from the response that we've had, I think we've really been successful with this wine because it really helps a lot of people to approach Tuscan wines and maybe move on to Rosso di Montalcino and Brunello di Montalcino after trying the Toscana Rosso. And then, of course, Rosso di Montalcino it's all about the purity of the Sangiovese. Because when you have to learn what Sangiovese should be like, look and taste, you can really approach this with a Rosso di Montalcino. You see the beautiful ruby red color and the light that goes through it. And then when you start smelling it, you really have this beautiful red fruit, like a lot of cherries and berries that really tell you the beauty of Sangiovese. And then when you drink it, you have like the structure from the aging, but at the same time you have the beautiful freshness that integrates with this fruit. So it's really all about the purity of the grapes.
That makes sense. So the Rosso di Montalcino ages, you said a year minimum. Is that what you guys follow?
So yes, there's no aging requirement by law. But
that's right. Yeah.
Our choice was to age it for 12 months because we understand some producers are going towards the unoaked style, but we want to we don't want the Rosso to be like the poor cousin of the Brunello. It should be like a wine with its own personality and also ageability. The Rosso should be enjoyable now, but if you want to keep it on the side and go back to it in 10 years, it should still be a wine with its own personality and different aspects. Of course, will be a little bit less about the fresh red fruit but you will find other notes like forest floor or dried leaves, dried flowers. So things that you will find in an aged Sangiovese. So still very interesting, but also very different.
Okay, great. And then just to wrap up the portfolio behind me, we touch on the rosé a little bit too. Is that all Sangiovese as well?
Definitely. It is all Sangiovese from our younger vineyards. As I was mentioning before, the age of the vines is our choice for the grapes for all the different wines. So single vineyard, 61-year-old for the Riserva, 25-plus-year-old vines for the Brunello, 15-plus-year-old vines for the Rosso di Montalcino, and when they're younger than that, we use them for the Rosso di Toscana and the Rosato. So for our Rosato, we make a rosé for a long time. Actually, the first vintage was 2008. So there was not a lot of rosé being made in Italy at the time. And now there is, but we were definitely very, very early in this choice. And so what we did is we tried to make a Rosato from Sangiovese, but it doesn't work really well. You get like wines that are pretty dark in color. The acidity is really, really high. And also you get the tannins out. So not really a style that we like for our rosé. So we decided to do a little bit different. We do early harvest of the Sangiovese. So these are the first Sangiovese vines that we harvest. Short skin contact, maximum 12 hours. Otherwise, you end up with wines that are definitely too rich in terms of color. And then cold fermented, as it was a white wine. So just to highlight the freshness of the wine. And in fact, when you taste it and when you smell it, one can find like all the beautiful red fruit aspect of it. Of course, in a red Sangiovese, it's more, as I was mentioning, cherries and berries. In a Sangiovese made as rosé, you will find fresh red fruit, like this strawberries, raspberries, which make a lot of sense because you also want a wine that, is fresh and cleanse your palate when you drink something. But, the advantage of Tuscany compared to other parts of the world where rosé is made, is that we are a little bit southern. So the wines are richer in general. The rosé is richer. And so it becomes an year-round type of rosé. So even now, when the weather starts to get a bit cooler and the food starts to get a little bit richer, is a rosé that goes really, really well, even with the holidays approaching.
Yeah, certainly. Because it has that acid, but there's almost like a savory nature to a lot of rosés made like yours as well. Yeah, so that makes sense.
Absolutely.
Great. Well, I wanted to, as we're coming closer to time here, I wanted just to get your perspective a little bit on the region and the winery. How have you seen it really evolve in the last, say, 20, 30 years? And then where do you think it's going? Are you guys going to continue to evolve a lot? Or are you trying to work to keep things as similar and staid as possible?
I think there is a return to the traditional aspect of Sangiovese, focusing on the fruit and on the farming. And that is coming also with the new generation of farmers. There's a lot of family businesses where, their kids, 20, 30 or 40 years old, are taking over their family work. And so there is a strong attention to the farming and to the sustainability aspect. Plus, which I think is really, really important, we are a very strong and very united community as far as producers, especially with the newer generation producers. There is a communication, many, many times where we get together, try each other's wines, share opinion. And so that is very important because there is space for everyone in the market and it allows everyone to learn because many things are different based on where you are, but also other things could be in common. It's important to share and to, when there's issues, maybe your next door neighbor has solved those issues. And so by communicating, it's very easy to find ways to improve the quality. So yes, I see that in the future of Montalcino is definitely very bright in this case.
Yeah, fantastic. Are you at Il Poggione in particular? Are you guys you've become organic? Is there anything that you guys are trying to implement next or on the roadmap, or are you just planning on just continuing to make the best wines you can as you have for decades now?
We are continuing to do that. The situation is always more complicated because the weather is not helping us. So staying organic is a very important goal, I would say, because that you hear all the time, like in other parts of Italy, some wineries are even dropping their certification because it's definitely a struggle to stay organic nowadays. But for the moment, we're trying to continue as much as we can to be sustainable like we've always been, and focusing on the quality. We don't have any other objectives for the moment as far as new things to look for. Just keeping the quality bar as high as we can and continuing towards the manual work in the vineyards, the sustainable approach in everything that we do. Because the winery has been around for 130 years. We plan on at least 130 years at least.
Well, I think that's the perfect place to leave it. So thank you so much for your time today, Alessandro. This has been great.
Thank you, Billy. Thank you very much for hosting me. It's been great.
All right. That was our interview with Alessandro Bindocci of Il Poggione. I hope everybody learned a lot about Montalcino and Brunello di Montalcino. I hope everybody goes and checks out Il Poggione's wines. In their portfolio, they really do have something from everyone, from the everyday crowd pleaser to the collectible wines. So go and check them out. And that is our episode for this week. We'll be back with another full episode next week and 5 questions on Friday. Till then, cheers.